Our next presentation is a bonus session, Sexy DR Radio Facts. Our speakers from Hybrid Media Services, Graham Keenan, and from Power Media Incorporated, Glenn Rosenberg. And our moderator from Dial 800, Scott Richards.
Thank you, Craig. Thank you. So I'd like everybody to, first of all, take out your cell phone. Don't put it away, and don't turn it off. If you would like a copy of the presentation afterwards, I know there's a lot of things that you do at the show. I'm going to give you a number. You can just text it. I will then have somebody in my office send you a link back with the actual presentation. So if we say anything worthwhile, then you'll be able to tell it to other people in your office. So here's the number. It's 310-613-8686. Again, 310-613-8686. 8686. You can just text the number and say radio. That's fine. And we'll send you a link online. So I want to thank everybody for joining us today. We have two super veterans in radio, and we'd like to first introduce Glenn Rosenberg. Glenn Rosenberg is on the left, or on my left, your right. Glenn is the VP of Power Media Services. He's been in radio. In fact, they've both been in radio for over 30 years. They've done many, many things. Glenn was the Director of Affiliate Relations for the Radio Advertising Bureau. The Radio Advertising Bureau is the largest radio association in the United States. And he was also the General Sales Manager of a major station in New York, WBLS. He is in charge of client services at Power Media. Graham Keenan is the Business Development Director. They do remnant buying, they both do direct response, specialize in that, and he's been in also for over 30 years. A lot of wisdom. If you remember many years ago, MCI had a brand called 1-800-COLLECT. Graham is the one who brought it to market and brought him to radio with MCI. And I'm Scott Richards. I'm the CEO of Dial 800. And we've got a booth over here, and we do call routing and also memorable toll-free numbers. And I'm also the chairman of the Radio Council, and they're both members of the council. So with that, we'd like to just give you a little bit of information. We called it Sexy DR Radio Facts, because there's really not a lot sexy about radio, and we thought it was a nice contrast. So is radio dead? That's the big question. Is it something that anybody in DR that really wants to consider? Everybody thinks about TV and certainly online. So should you even consider DR as part of your radio? So the question is, why radio? And the first is, because not a lot of people are focusing on it, the costs are very low, super targeted media, and you also have it's the medium with probably the least distractions. So if you're there advertising and somebody's listening to a radio show, as we all know, you're connected to that show and the personality, and there's not a lot else to do in the car. So basically, low cost, as we said, low production costs, also very targeted, and as I said, no distractions. So you're listening in the car. 242 million people are listening to radio on an average month. That's 242 million people, and it reaches 93% of that market. So anybody 12 plus, 242 million people every week, week in and week out. And radio is a very habitual thing, as we all know. Most of us have certain stations, certain personalities, and certain times that we listen to radio. So it can be a very effective medium. 15 hours a week is what, according to the Radio Advertising Bureau, is the number of hours that people spend listening to radio. It's actually bigger than Facebook and YouTube. It's only second to TV. And many people would think, gee, Facebook was much bigger than radio. Many more people would be spending time on Facebook or YouTube. It's not true. So you've got a medium that a lot of people aren't really focused on, and you can get some really low costs per leads and things like that. What we would like to do is try to make it very real for everybody, and I'd like to call up Graham to give us what can $10,000 on radio buy us. So with that, I'd like to call Graham up to the podium.
Thank you, sir. First, let's start with network radio. Network radio, just a quick overview, is national radio. Reaches thousands and thousands of different stations. There's many, many different networks. But the bottom line, for about $10,000 a week, you can get about 110 different ads on a radio network and reach about 6 million people. There's all sorts of networks, as you know, sports networks, personality networks, but for the most part, you can get everybody from Dennis Miller to Alan Combs, and each one of these networks, for the most part, the talk radio networks work a lot better for DR because they are engaging. When you listen to a talk radio program, whether it's Rush or anybody with a big name, they tend to be extremely loyal people to the radio programs, and whether you agree with their political leanings left or right, they tune in, and they're very engaged with the personalities. As Scott mentioned, we're in the remnant radio business. Network radio and spot radio each week have unsold inventory. And the fact of the matter is, if you're working with the right people, you can get radio spots, radio commercials for 50, 60 cents on the dollar. Look at it this way. If an airline has got an unbooked seat, the price of that seat is going to be very, very expensive the closer you book to the actual time you're leaving on a trip. Well, with radio, it's the exact opposite. They'd rather have something than nothing. And it's kind of a dirty little secret. They don't like to promote it, but that's what we do. And we work with thousands and thousands of radio stations each week. Our rates are already pre-negotiated. It's basically how many orders can you take. And that explains remnant radio. Next, we're going to talk about, this is also a network radio example using just Rush Limbaugh. 3 spots on Rush Limbaugh for $10,000 will reach 1.6 million people each week. That's an example of Rush Limbaugh. Same thing with Hannity and Beck, the very, very loyal audiences. A big tool that we use on a weekly basis that works extremely well for direct response is Sirius. Sirius Radio reaches about 36 million people a week, tends to be a little bit more affluent, tends to reach the professional sort of road warrior people that are on the road a lot, very established brands. Everybody, of course, Howard Stern, but the brands have been established on television, so if you tend to listen to CNN or Fox or MSNBC, you're going to listen to them on the radio. It kind of transfers from the television point of view. Next, I'd like to talk briefly about streaming media, digital radio, whatever you want to call it. The fact of the matter is there's about 35 of these streaming companies out there that are pure play streaming radio networks. And then when you add in about 1,200 radio stations that are also streaming their signal, it's a pretty big marketplace to tap into. That's, what these folks will sort of lead you to believe. The dirty little secret is when you're streaming media, whether it's in your office or on your cell phone, it's kind of background. In other words, when the ads pop up, if you're in the office working, you're not necessarily going to stop what you're doing and click on the little banner to open up the player and click on the banner and get sent over to a website. Because there are so many of these networks out there, we've decided just to focus on one. Pandora's probably got the lead spot right now. They're big. They're starting to get on the dashboard in many, many cars. They're a big presence. But once again, most of the streaming happens in office. So you got to be careful with what you're actually selling. And the fact of the matter is they are going after local radio dollars. They have about 350 local salespeople that will go after car dealer money, very localized businesses, such as, a dentist. We got an example from Pandora, and real quickly I'd like to play you a spot from Pandora's stream for this local dentist.
Mm-hmm. Music? How about totally free teeth whitening at Mint Dentistry? No exams, no cleaning, no x-rays required. If you have PPO dental insurance, Mint Dentistry will whiten your teeth for free. And we won't bill your insurance company. There's no catch and no pain, just incredibly white teeth for free. If you have PPO insurance, call now, 214-821-MINT, or click on the Mint logo to go directly to our website, mintdentistry.com. 214-821-MINT.
So the bottom line on streaming and digital radio is I think it's really just too early to say. We don't use it a lot. It doesn't seem to pay out in terms of direct response advertising for a couple of reasons. Once again, it's kind of a background format. Second thing is anybody who's streaming off their cell phone tends to be a younger consumer that doesn't necessarily want to be hit with a bunch of commercials. And I don't think the tipping point is there yet. Another 5 or 6 years, I think it will be a viable medium because it'll be in all the cars. Whereas Sirius and before that MXM got into all the cars and they're there already. Pretty much every production model is coming off the line has got Sirius and XM and a very, very loyal audience. So in terms of what works, we prefer Sirius XM local spot radio at remnant rates and national radio at remnant rates. Now, ready, Glenn?
Thank you, Graham. So I'd like to know what works. There is 4 components that Graham and Glenn have really identified if you're going to be on radio and your product fits into these. So I'd like to ask either of you gentlemen to start. Give me 2 each. What do you need to have to be really successful on radio? What kind of product? And give me an idea.
Well, first of all, it has to be something that's service-oriented. You can't do a demonstration on the radio, obviously. So point 1 is it's got to be something that's already very insurance categories, financial services, nutraceuticals, things like that have recurring revenue streams are very, very popular on radio. And it works. And obviously, a lot of the things that are here would never work on radio. Anything that needs a demonstration is just not going to fly.
Good. Glenn?
We also found that mature products that maybe have been on television or cable for a while, where the consumer is familiar with the brand, and therefore doesn't need the visual demonstration, works very well as well. The other thing that also works extremely well is high-ticket items, where you don't need to have a low cost per lead.
Good. And Graham, do you have anything else?
No. I mean, for the most part, the best categories that work for us are, I don't want to call it downscale financial, but credit relief, loan bailout, student loan bailout, unfortunately, is a gigantic category right now for a bunch of reasons. But,
and if people came to you and they had a product or service, and you would advise them, I would assume, that I've seen this work or I wouldn't try to spend your money on radio.
Yeah.
Generally, yes.
Okay, Glenn, I'd like you to come up. I'd like Glenn to give you an example. He has a case study of a client I think you're going to find very interesting, and you're going to see the evolution of actually what happened. The client came in, and the kind of the metamorphosis of this client. So, Glenn, with that, go right ahead.
Thank you. We work with a client who sells. Thank you. Who sells upscale products for the home, water purifiers, air purifiers, that type of thing. One of the things that we realized we had a perception problem originally, because when consumers thought of dehumidifiers, they thought of going to Sears, buying one for $150 where you empty out the buckets of water. And that was a problem because our systems could range up to $4,000. So there was a very big potential for a disconnect with the consumer. The other thing is that when you go into Sears and buy a product for $150, ours needed to be professionally installed by a plumber. So clearly we had to do a lot of education, both in terms of the product as well as creating a need for the product with the consumer. Initially, we tested television. We had inherited a spot from a creative agency that was very focused on the technical aspects of why the product was a good product. The reality is that it just didn't generate the leads and the costs that we needed. So we had to, the goal then was really to come up with a formula that would decrease the cost per lead, increase the number of leads. As life has it, we did not have the budget to redo a TV commercial. So we said, what else can we do? And we moved the client into talk radio. The formats that we used were news, talk, and sports initially. Each station that we used was assigned a unique tracking number, and we always strive to use numbers that are easy to remember, have repeater numbers, that type of thing. Each station was also given a unique URL tracking so that should the consumer not pick up the phone but rather go online, we had a way of capturing that data as well. In order to do that, we also had to take into account that some people just go to Google and search for the client name. So prior to starting the campaign, we established a baseline metric for how many web visits they were generating before the campaign, and therefore we could assign any uplift to the campaign itself. The initial spots from television really were about the technical aspects of the machinery, and we made a switch to really to stress the benefits to the consumer, as most of them didn't even realize they had a problem, such as mold and airborne pollutants. So what were the benefits? Certainly helped with taking the mold and things out of the air. It helped with contaminants in the air. It also helped if anybody in your house had asthma, because again, took out airborne products. What I'd like to do is and that part of the campaign went very well, so we decided, how do we take this up to the next level? And we decided to take radio and start using live endorsements from personalities. And I'd like to play you an example of one of those.
Amy, thank you very much. We'll get you a weather forecast in a minute. You looking to get rid of the humidity, basement crawl space? Natalie was just telling me, because I read one of these commercials earlier, and I said about the dehumidifiers and the buckets of waters, and she goes, yeah, I emptied mine just the other day. I said, Nat, you got to get yourself a wave ventilation unit. You got to get it done, because that's the new way, it's the good way, and it is the less expensive way of reducing humidity in your house. Those dehumidifiers chewed up energy like crazy. Wave ventilation unit, very small fan that works 24 hours a day. I run mine 12 months out of the year. You wouldn't have to do that necessarily, but I do, just to keep things the way they are. And it just moves air across your basement floor, your crawl space floor, and expels it outside, and it's done. The whole house will be a much more comfortable and healthier place. Go to nomorehumidity.com to see exactly how the wave ventilation unit works. Then don't delay, call them, have one installed. 888-782-WAVE, 888-782-WAVE. Why not start at the website? nomorehumidity.com, then.
So to give you an example, that spot, this was John Gambling from one of the New York radio stations. He's been doing live reads for us for about 7 years now. If you notice, his spots all had a unique number. Again, it was to the consumer, it was a vanity number, something, something, something wave. The reality is that we have probably 20 different variations with the word wave in it for different stations. Also has a unique URL. So whether somebody goes to the website because they heard it on John, or they call in, we can attribute the lead. We do a mixture of live reads and pre-recorded. Part of the reason for that is cost. It costs a little more to do an endorsement spot, but if the host that is doing the spot is credible and believable, it really pays dividends. In this case, I'll tell you a quick funny story. We were doing pre-recorded spots on John's show, and his wife called in to order a unit. And it happened to be that the person that answered the phone said, you know, we run on a show named Gambling. She said, oh, that's my husband. So we said, oh, this is too good to be true. We wound up doing, rather than paying a talent fee, we wound up installing a unit in his home, and he's been doing spots for us now for close to 7 years. one of the things that we do whenever we do live endorsements is we have to make sure that we fully vet the host to make sure that there's no hidden baggage. Again, we want it to be credible. Certainly you wouldn't want to have me do an endorsement for hair products. Wouldn't be believable. So we want to make sure that he's fully aware of it. We also want to make sure that both he and the client are FTC compliant with the endorsement rules. Sometimes you run the risk where the announcer gets so in love with the product that he embellishes a little bit too much, and that could really cause a problem for you. You don't want somebody who's endorsing a diet product to say, I'm losing 7 pounds a week. You're going to have an FTC issue. So, but we certainly for the right host really support endorsement radio. Bottom line is radio now represents about 70% of our clients' media budget. We're doing spot radio in a dozen key markets. We also do network radio, and we even do per inquiry when it's available. We've tracked the difference between endorsement radio and the pre-recorded spots, and our cost per lead is about half on endorsement radio than it is on pre-recorded, just so you have a means of comparison. But they are now, what was a television advertiser is now firmly a believer in radio. Thank you.
Thank you, Glenn. So that was the Sexy DR Radio Facts. These are our presenters here. There we go. And if anybody has any questions, I'm glad to entertain them. Yes, sir? I'll try to repeat your question. Go ahead. Okay, so this gentleman has a short-form DR product that's on television, and he wants to know, can you just take that TV spot, give it to a guy who's an expert in radio, and do you guys do the same spot? Do you retool the spot? Talk to me about a guy who's got a spot, and he brings it to you. What do you do, and what does it cost him? Make it real.
In a nutshell, the first question you have to is, with your TV campaign, is it generating the response that you're hoping for? Or is this a salvage job? Let's assume that it's... Okay, so if you haven't heard, he's doing a 2-to-1 MER now. Okay, so the short answer to your question is it's certainly doable without knowing what the demographic is and all of your metrics. It's hard to tell you where we would place you, but it's certainly something that's done all the time. You have a greater chance of success given the fact that you have television exposure currently.
Graham, what would you say that he would have to spend, soup to nuts, to get a radio commercial made and on the air that would give you enough information to say whether or not he should roll this out on radio?
$500. $500. $500
to make this spot.
For a commercial. Yeah, it's cheap. I mean, when you think about it, television production is so expensive. I've had TV advertisers come to me and I say, just do one less TV spot and give me that money, and I'll show you how radio will make your television more effective. So there's this whole thing about imagery transfer, and if the brand is somewhat successful and known already, you're basically using radio just to remind that person that, oh yeah, I heard about this nutraceutical thing, I want it. I don't know what the product is, but you can really peel a grape with radio in terms of reaching the correct demographic.
So,
yeah,
okay, so
now understand what that also means. Take this to the next step. That also means that you could test several versions
right,
without having to outlay tens and tens of thousands of dollars in production to make sure that the spot is performing the way you want it to.
And that's why we used the $10,000 analogy for different medium. You can start in 2 markets with $10,000. You'd probably want to be on a news talk station or a talk station. And then, as Glenn said, maybe down the road you start talking about live reads and endorsement. I mean, the bottom line with personalities, people listen to 2 or 3 radio stations, and the personality becomes like a buddy. So the spot sounds like advice from a friend as opposed to a commercial.
Right, but at the start, they'll make a pre-recorded commercial, they'll put it on air, and it's $10,000, $10,500, maybe $10,000 if you really bargain with them in total.
Yeah,
right?
and you'll know at the end of the week if it's working or not.
So
1 week.
We're cutting deals on production cost on radio today.
Anybody else have any other questions about radio? Okay, again, if anybody has an interest in receiving the presentation, you can send a text now. If you take your phone out, it's 310-613-8686, and text the word radio, and we'll send you a link. You'll get it after we put it together and get the link. So again, 310-613-8686. Text radio, and we'll send you a link to the radio presentation. Any other questions? Yes.
He wants the number again.
Yes, 310-613-8686. Okay, I want to thank everybody for coming. I hope you have a great rest of your show. Thank you for joining us.